Oops. Okay. Part 2. This is 22nd Amendment, Part 2. For some reason, my stupid phone camera turned off right in the middle when I was getting all excited there. Okay, so now we're talking about George Bush. We're talking about the Bush family and the 22nd Amendment. Okay, this is amazing. The 22nd Amendment has actually created a new monarchy. It has created the monarchy of the Bush family. You have George Bush I served for 1 term, George Bush II served for 2 terms, and now Jebby Bush III apparently is going to serve for another 2 terms. Now that means that one family, one immediate family, will have served for 5 terms. For 5 terms. One immediate family will have served for 5 terms. That beats the heck out of Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt only served for 3 1/16 of a term. Now, they make this whole big deal about Roosevelt serving 4 terms. He didn't serve 4 terms. He died 3 months into his 4th term. And the only reason he went for his 4th term was because we were in the middle of World War II. Roosevelt ran for his 4th term like just about right after D-Day, for God's sake. Okay? So, what happened? So, look at the Bushes, First of all, George Bush I. George Bush I, the only reason he was elected president was because Ronald Reagan was term limited out. Ronald Reagan was term limited out by the 22nd Amendment. Okay? George Bush II, now, a big part of the reason that he was elected was because Bill Clinton was not allowed to run by the 22nd Amendment. The 22nd Amendment would not allow Bill Clinton to run. So you got George W. Bush. There's another 2 terms for the Bush monarchy. Now, Barack Obama will not be allowed to run in 2016, so that makes it a lot easier for King Jeb Bush III to serve 2 more terms, which will give 5 terms. 5 terms to the Bush family. I mean, you have this Bush, you have one immediate family, George the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, like George Bush the first, then George Bush the son, and then Jeb the son. Between them, they might very well serve 5 terms. 5 terms. And all of this in the name of preventing one person from serving too many terms. I mean, is that insane or is that insane? And the thing that's really crazy is that most Americans, the American people are so stupid, the American people are so incredibly stupid, they actually like this 22nd Amendment thing. I mean, if there's anything, I mean, basically, I believe in democracy and stuff, but about some things, the American people are really stupid. I can't believe that nobody is upset that there is such a thing as a 22nd Amendment, and nobody is upset that they can't vote for who they want to vote for. Why can't I vote for who I want to vote for? I mean, why couldn't a Republican vote for Ronald Reagan in 1988? You weren't allowed to. Why can't I vote for Bill Clinton or for Barack Obama in 2016? It's crazy. It's crazy. There's no advantage to it, and Ronald Reagan knew exactly what he was talking about when he said, 22nd Amendment is good for poop. Okay? All right, now let's get down to Alexander Hamilton, who was really a cool guy. Oops. Hold on a second. I put you on hold, except when I put people on hold here, when I try and install this stupid video, it dies. So you're just going to have to bear with me here. All right. Okay, here we go. Here's another great drawing I have. Here's another great sign I have. Let's see. Whoa. Let's see. I would show it to you crosswise, but I think crosswise it winds up being upside down sort of. Anyway. Okay, well you might have to sort of stand on your head to read this, but that's your problem. Okay. Now here we go. The real talk. All right, this is the magnificent document. A really magnificent document that you should read. You should definitely read. If you're interested in the 22nd Amendment, definitely you got to read the Federalist Paper number 72 by Alexander Hamilton. This thing, it's only about 3 pages long, and it's pretty much readable for something that old, and it's really a great document. Now, he outlines 5 reasons why there should not be term limits. He lists 5 ill effects of term limits, presidential term limits I'm talking about here. We're just talking about presidential term limits. We're not talking about congressional stuff. That's a whole other ball game. I'm not even talking about that. All right, and I don't have an opinion on that. But presidential term limits, they suck. Okay, so here's Alexander Hamilton saying there are 5 ill effects of presidential term limits. The first one, obviously, no incentive to perform. Okay, no incentive to perform. You can only in your second term, there's no incentive to perform because you can't get reelected. And this also leads to, okay, there's also a second disadvantage. It creates lame ducks. You never had lame ducks before 1951. You basically never had a lame duck before the Eisenhower administration of 1956. Never before in American history. You know, that's another thing I failed to mention. From the time of the Constitution until 1940, that's about 140 years. For 140 years, we had no formal term limits whatsoever on the presidency. But yet, no president ever served more than 2 terms. Why? There are natural self-limiting forces. First of all, it's exhausting. Being president is exhausting, and most people don't even want to be president more than 2 terms. In fact, there's a good chance that Roosevelt would not have even served 3 or particularly 4 terms if it hadn't been for World War II. You know, if it hadn't been for World War II, and if it hadn't been for so many Republicans being isolationists. That's something the Republicans are embarrassed about now. They're too embarrassed to talk about that now. But before World War II, a lot of Republicans were isolationists. They did not want to get involved in World War II. And the fact is, and then they say, oh, Roosevelt got us into World War II. He got us into World War II with Pearl Harbor. Well, God bless him, because if we hadn't had Pearl Harbor when we did, if Pearl Harbor had not happened and America had put off entering into World War II another year or 2, well, I would be delivering this talk in German or Japanese if I was even alive. And believe it, because if another year or 2 went by, Great Britain would have fallen. Great Britain would have been conquered by the Germans. They would have been conquered by the Germans, there's no doubt about it, without American help. And even Russia, even the Soviet Union, if we hadn't been helping them, there's a chance they would have been even more hurt. You know, so the Nazis would have been totally controlling Europe, and because Britain would have fallen, we would not have even had a foothold to launch a D-Day invasion. So maybe Adolf Hitler would still be running Europe today. Wouldn't that just be wonderful? And then you have these Euro trash idiots. Who say, oh, it doesn't really matter who won World War II anyway. You know, if the Germans had won World War II, it'd be the same as the Americans. What a bunch of morons. I mean, talk about morons with a capital M. Can you imagine anybody being that stupid? My God. Anyway. Whoa, we're getting it. I'm holding this stupid camera in my hands, so you have to. Anyway, okay. So, second point again, creates lame ducks and temptation. Temptation is a good point. You have temptation because there's no incentive, and Hamilton brings up a good point. Like, a lame duck president is a guy who is the president now. See, he's the president right now, and he's got all kinds of goodies and stuff. But in a year or 2, he's not going to be nothing. He's not going to be diddly squat. And he can't be diddly squat again, ever. So what's he going to do? He's going to try and gather up as much power and as much goodies as he possibly can while he's the president. You see? That was Hamilton's idea, and it's not far off. Look, and let's face it now, a lot of lame duck presidents have had scandals. You had Tricky Dicky. You know, Tricky Dicky and Good old Watergate, that happened in his second term. Then you had Ronald Reagan, Iran-Contra in his second term. And then good old Slick Willie, and Monica Lewinsky in his second term. Presidents don't do real good in the second term. Now, George W. Bush didn't have any official scandals except for the way the stupid economy was. Okay, now, third thing, term limits, presidential term limits deprive America of wise leaders. Presidents, people who have served as presidents who are, Hamilton says that experience is the mother of wisdom, see? So people who have served as president, they have a certain amount of wisdom, but we're deprived of them, and that's very true. And it deprives America of great commanders, great military commanders, like Franklin Roosevelt. If Franklin Roosevelt had been term limited, he wouldn't have been able to be the commander-in-chief in 1940. If he had been term limited in 1944, he wouldn't have been able to continue as the commander-in-chief. And I'd say he was a pretty good commander-in-chief. I mean, the United States of America wound up winning World War II. We wound up gaining the absolute surrender of the Germans and the Japanese. I'd say that's a pretty good job. You might not agree with all his social stuff, but he was a heck of a good commander. Okay, the fifth point, the fifth ill effect is the instability caused by all of these forced changes every 2 years. Every 2 years, you got to change to a new president. Okay, well, that's about it. Now I'm going to go into my my conclusion here. Where's my conclusion? Okay, here's my conclusion. All things considered, the 22nd Amendment was a very bad amendment. It is unnecessary, undemocratic, and destructive. It turns presidents into lame ducks. So revoking the 22nd Amendment would be the best path for both political parties. And now here's another thing that's very important. The only way that we could revoke the 22nd Amendment is if there is a rider in it. There has to be a rider in it that would exclude all living presidents, so that all living presidents would still be term limited, So Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush would still be term limited. I think that's the only way that it could possibly pass through Congress, and that's fine with me, because the important thing is that we get rid of the 22nd Amendment, and people have to stop thinking about whether that's good for the Republicans or good for the Democrats. The fact is, if you look through history, sometimes it's good for the Democrats, sometimes it's good for the Republicans, and you just have to live with that, because that's what democracy is all about. There's a certain amount of risk in democracy. Okay, so that's the end of the end of my wonderful speech. Let's see if I can turn this freaking thing off.